good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. We are so excited to have you joining us tonight for another episode of Exceptional Women with Grit, where we interview amazing women around the world who are doing truly phenomenal things. Tonight, hey Lee, how are you? Good
Hey,
evening.
good evening. How are you?
So excited to be back, man. I'm here. International Women's Day, Women's
Hey,
History Month. I'm so excited.
okay. Hey, I'm excited about it as well. Yeah, Women's History Month. I'm in the Rotary Club here. Yesterday, we heard from Judge Sheila Calloway, who runs our juvenile court.
Mhm.
Yesterday, and everybody loves her, but she's really real. Just talked about some of the people that inspired her, some of the women that inspired her, especially as it relates to juvenile justice and how there were women probably 100 years ago that recognized that our juveniles were being treated like adults when
Mm.
it comes to the justice system. And so some of the sentencing that were put on them and those types of things, it wasn't anything that helped them. And then of course we know that juveniles, men, period, up until age 25, 26, haven't fully even developed their brains
That's
to
right.
make the right decisions. But we're judging them a lot of times like they're grown men. So now they can't drink, they can't go to the army, but we can put them up, we can lock them up forever for some of the stupid stuff that they do. So, but yeah, she was great, and looking forward to our guest this month as well.
Yes,
We have some phenomenal women
absolutely.
coming up this month. Y'all don't want to miss it.
That's right. That's right. We've got some amazing women who are doing truly, truly phenomenal work around the world. So go ahead and like us, share. Make sure that you share this information with someone that you believe should hear this. I mean, we have such amazing guests that grace our stage. So be sure to follow us on Facebook, Women with Grit. Women with Grit on all of our feeds, or you can also go to our website, www.womenwithgrit.com. And tonight we have another amazing guest, Miss Diana Sanchez-Vega. So we'll bring her up in just a moment as
Yeah.
well.
Hmm. Yep. Yep. So what you got going on?
Man, Lee, so much. Let me tell you, one of the things that I'm working on at home is just kind of, restoring a pipe that broke. But that can
Gotcha.
always be fun, right? You got all these plans, and then life happens to kind of
Right.
derail you. And what we have to do, we have to bounce back and, grab the bull by the horn, so to speak, and continue to move forward. So that's been
Hmm.
occupying my time this
Gotcha.
past week. How about
Yeah.
you?
Yeah. We had just speaking of that kind of stuff, we had some heavy winds in Nashville and Middle Tennessee last week.
Yeah.
So we had the roofing guy come out to take a look at this big piece of metal that flew off from somewhere. We have
Did it hit
shingles
your
that came
home
down.
or?
It was something that was on the home on our house, and it just flew off with the winds along with some shingles.
Yeah.
But ours wasn't as bad as some people. I mean, some people they actually literally have to put tarps on their roofs until they
Oh,
can
wow.
get out to service them. And of course, we had some deaths from some trees falling on people as
Mm-hmm.
well in the area. So it was, yeah. So we're all and I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday. His power had been off since Friday, and so it just actually came back on
Interesting.
yesterday. So
Wow.
it's yeah. So Mother Nature is doing her thing right now, and so we just have to sit back and respond accordingly.
That's right.
But we have no
Interesting
control
weather
over it, so we
patterns.
have to remember that as well.
Right. There have been so many interesting weather patterns lately, but
Hmm.
glad that we're all safe as best as possible. Just got to take care of our home, our families, and do what we can to be as safe as possible
That's right.
in the
That's
midst.
right.
Well, let me tell you a little bit about our guest, right? And so, again, you guys, if you're joining in, please leave your city and state in the chat function. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us this evening on Women with Grit. Diana Sanchez Vega is a bilingual communications trainer, speaker, and Spanish interpreter slash translator. She also coaches bilingual students to find work. She is the founder and CEO of Sanchez Vega Communications based in Nashville, Tennessee, where she and her team make right connections happen by empowering bilinguals to monetize the value of their language skills and partnering with organizations who understand the multiplication or the how to multiply the return on investment of truly monetizing bilingualism. She holds a master's of arts in psychological studies, having previously completed her bachelor's of science in international business in Argentina. She speaks intermediate Portuguese and is well versed in French as well. Raised in the duality of the Anglo Argentine environment, Diana learned at an early age how to navigate between two cultures, two belief systems, and two social classes, developing a deep understanding of the subtleties of translation and bioculturalism. Let me tell you, I got to pause there because it's so important. And I think sometimes we understate the value and the depth of the need to really understand the culturals and just her ability to flex between the two, because that's where communication happens. That's where sometimes miscommunication happens. Can't wait to bring Diana up. I've got so much exciting stuff to actually kind of delve into on that as well. But let me delve back into her bio. Let me tell you, from 2015 to 2017, she lived in California, where she was honored for her craft in training bilingual staff and to stay level headed during challenging life saving situations that occur in emergency and urgent care settings. Diana's early life experiences, her early life experience with mentors and teachers empowered her toward a belief in transformation through interpersonal communication. And when asked what drives her passion, she says, the courage I developed through my early learning process with my mentors empowered me to preserve and engage in partnership to build strategy. That experience enabled me to produce results for myself. I now integrate that knowledge to brighten my clients' intercultural connections to foster growth and prosperity. I'm so excited to have our guest. Let's go ahead and bring on stage Diana. How are you? Good evening, Diana. Welcome.
Hi, Cheryl and Lee. Good evening. Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, thank you. Thank you for taking the time to join us and to um, grace I can't say our stage,
Our virtual stage.
our virtual stage and platform. And I know our guests today are going to be blessed to hear what you have to say and to learn more about you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yes. So let's get it started. Diana, tell us more about your unique story of grit.
As you mentioned, Cheryl, I was born and raised in Argentina, and I've always been what I like to call it life in the hyphen, right? And that's why my last name, which is my brand, actually has a hyphen, because it's this in between. I was I was raised by my mom, but she married my stepdad when I was 5 years old. And let me tell you, I was mad. In their wedding, you can see the pictures, I was just crying. I'm like, I just want, my mom for me and no one else. And so I think that from that moment on, and I mean, that's where my memory goes to when someone asks me, it's always been about alternatives and what I can do if something doesn't work. And the good news is that I was very blessed that my mom married my stepdad, because he is American, and that gave me the opportunity of to live in a place where I was always going back and forth, and that gave me an opportunity to open up alternatives when something are not, or better said, to seek alternatives when something is not working. So for me, grit stands for, and I was sharing this with someone last year, and I said, well, what do you mean grit? And I said, for me, grit is, girl, resilience is tough. So talking to myself constantly about beating the odds, or about being able to get ahead, both in my personal life and in my business, is something that is not easy. And we generally know that, but really reminding myself that there are alternatives, that if something is not working, then move on to something else that really helps me get ahead. And so growing up and attending schools where very demanding schools for 12 years between, elementary school and high school, middle school and high school. There were a lot of demands that were put on us as students because we were actually doing double the work and really trying to figure out how to incorporate that into my life. Also, ensuring that I kept a personal life really meant that I had to be constantly adjusting. And so for me, grit is that constant idea of adjustment. Eventually, as I moved to the US when I was already 32 years old, I had to adjust once again. And in that case, it was really acculturating into the everyday life in a different environment, a different country. And even though I had been born I had been raised bicultural, when you are in a different setting every day, when you wake up every day and things are in a different language and the systems and things that are around you are different, in whether it's, in a good way or a bad way, you still have to adjust. You still have to integrate and then eventually acculturate to that. So for me, my story of grit really shows this pattern of constantly adjusting to new circumstances. And I don't know how to live differently. We can't hear you.
Can't hear
I
you, sir.
love that. And I have to rewind with what you said about not only alternatives and the constant adjustment, but tell our viewers again what grit means to you. I just want you guys to pause this because I loved it. Back here, I was like, yes, I love that. Tell us
Yeah.
your definition of grit again.
So grit for me is an acronym, and since I'm a language person, I'm always looking for the connection, right? So I was a friend of mine was asking me about, like, what does grit mean for you? And I said, well, for me, grit is the acronym of when I speak to myself, tell myself, girl, resilience is tough.
That there. Yes, yes.
There you go.
And it is tough, right? But it's a part of the drive to push through and to continue to press forward. So I love that. The second
Mhm.
thing I wanted to ask you to elaborate on is you said your brand is built on living life in the hyphen and the space of transition. Can you expound upon that a little bit more?
Yes. Um, so because I was raised. So when I was learning to live, basically, I was immersed in this duality, right? And in Argentina, for me, the duality was two cultures, the biculturalism and the bilingualism. So already with language processing this message transfer in my head first, right? When I'm going back and forth between these two languages and these two cultures, but also understanding how society operates and works. We have diversity and we have a variety. If we look at everything around us, there's variance, right? But things have to work together. Earlier, when we started, Lee was sharing, for example, the bad weather we had, and how he was adjusting to things that happened in his house. And Sherelle, you were saying about, you just adjust to when something happens in your home and you still have to do your work. But for me, the life in the hyphen has to be, is related to balancing the interactions between these two cultures and these two languages, first within me and then for the outside. So that balancing act, sometimes it's there's more weight on one side and other times there's more weight on the other side. So really being in the middle, trying to make that transition when we're going back and forth from one culture one culture into the other, into from one language into the other, or if I'm interacting. And I always say this, I am more of a everyday people person, right? So when I have to go into a room with folks that are when there is a lot of formality, for example, I really have to adjust because that's not where I naturally gravitate to. But that doesn't mean that I cannot operate in those settings. That means that I have to, again, talk to myself, right? Girl, resilience is tough. You can do this. If you want something, just adjust and pivot. And so, really doing that already constantly in my everyday, but then every time I encounter new circumstances as well. That for me is life in the hyphen.
Fantastic. Thank you for that.
Hmm.
Thank you.
That's phenomenal. So, Diana, one of the things that I recognize in your bio is you speak like 3 or 4 languages. Of course, us lazy folks here in the U.S.,
No, it's not lazy. I'll tell you my take on that later, but go ahead with your question.
well, you can feel free to give us your take on that as well. But
Yeah.
now, but yeah. So, but what is it about so many other most other countries? Um, you know, the residents, the folks that live there learn. Of course, a lot of times they learn English, but they not just learn their native language, but they tend to learn another language as well. So it's not uncommon for people from other countries and cultures to know 2, 3, 4 languages. And what was that process for you in learning multiple languages? How difficult was it? Uh, is it too late for us folks that are older? We just need to make sure our kids start learning that stuff, learning the languages now. What's your take on that?
So first of all, no one is old in this setting right now, so it's never too late. Just I don't think it's ever too late to learn anything. I define myself as a lifelong learner, and I think that that's part of my grit and my resilience, and that has helped me with that adjustment. I'm constantly learning. So if you need any leads on how to start learning a language, just let me know and I'll just send you some ideas.
Okay.
um, my take on why in other parts of the world, let's say, um, individuals maybe are more connected with learning other languages is this. So I'm going to kind of split the world right in different sections. First of all, we have countries that are developing countries. And so I think it's a socioeconomic factor. When I was actually in college, this was, an ongoing conversation, especially because Argentina has I want to tell you this real quick. So I'm from Buenos Aires, which is the capital city of Argentina. And actually, Buenos Aires is called the Paris of South America. And the reason is because Argentina had a much more established European influence than other countries in Latin America. But not because, there was anything fantastic, but, that was made it different. But because we are at the end of the Southern Cone, at the end of Latin America. So in the time of the conquistadors, right, when America had just been discovered and we had, different journeys coming into the Americas and settling in the Americas, by the time they got to Argentina and further south, they had run out of supplies. And so when they stopped in the port city, Buenos Aires is a port city, in the port city of Buenos Aires, they would have to stay inland longer while they were renewing their supplies than when they stayed in other port cities. And so folks that would come into the Americas, let's say, would get established and stay longer, maybe say, you know what, I'm not going back to Europe. I'm just staying here and hang out here. And so they started settling in, and that influence became bigger or more, not bigger, but more marked than in other places in Latin America. So that's one of the things that for us, for example, the influence was bigger. That's one item. Another item that would happen also because we were at the end of the Southern Cone, and this, bear with me because this kind of ties into your question, was that we were part of the Spanish Empire, right? From kind of what was the Spanish Empire in Spain. But the capital or the main location in the Americas, in the southern part of Latin America, was actually in Cusco, which is in Peru, which is way further north. And so if there was like a new edict, a new regulation, it would first go to Peru. And I'm talking about the years, 1600, 1700, 1800. And then the news would start coming down south. But sometimes decisions had to be made sooner before that new policy came into place. And so that made this development of a more independent thinking, a more independent way of thinking in Argentina and in Buenos Aires. So when we think about language learning, the United States has not traditionally needed to learn a new language because the United States has been and continues to be a strong economic power. And so if you don't need to go to the outside to interact with others, because quite frankly, you are comfortable and there is no big need, why would you? When we think about other developed countries, for example, Europe, where folks speak also 3, 4, 5 languages, my take and research shows that a lot of it has to do with proximity, right? Countries in Europe, the area in Europe is very small. And so, within an hour, you're already in another country. And so if you just travel 1 hour, you can go to another country, interact with them, and so you're learning the language. But that's not the case for the United States. So I don't think it's an issue of laziness. I think it's an issue of need. Now, at the turn of the century, things changed, right? And so I see very excitedly so how there is a very big push in the United States to raise children now, yes, bilingual, because the economic and social impact of that is now recognized because there is a need. But there wasn't a need before. So really, why do it?
Okay, that was very insightful. Yeah. So for example, we're Valerie and I were headed to Italy in towards the end of I think next month for a while. But as you were speaking, I mean, we could easily be in France. We could easily be in. I mean, we're going to fly into London, and so just on our journey, we'll hit different languages just in our journey to get to Italy. So that makes sense, and I hadn't really thought about it that way. Even our in the U.S., you cross the Canadian border, they speak English very well. Some parts of Canada, when you get up to say Montreal or Toronto, they speak some French, but that's not necessarily the dominant language in any of those places. But they speak both English and French. Whereas in the United States, we have pockets in Nashville where it's probably 20 different languages. I forgot how many different languages they say are spoken in our schools. Like, is it 80 or 180 or I can't remember, but there are quite a few languages because of so many folks that have moved here from other countries and cultures. So that makes a lot of sense. So thank you for shedding that light.
Absolutely.
And, yeah. So as you think about your kind of the way you were brought up, what influences do your international does your experiences and time, how does that influence what you're doing now in your business and how you operate? What are some things that you learned there that maybe you wouldn't have learned here, or opportunities that you had there that you wouldn't have had here that have helped you to, because you really grind, you put work in.
I do.
You're a networker. So.
I know I'm a natural networker. Some people would call me social butterfly, and I'm like, well, no, it depends. Like, I can be a social butterfly, but when I'm looking, when I want to drum up business, I want to drum up business.
Right.
I moved. So I'm just going to say my age, right? I'm 54. So I moved to the US when I was 32. And living in Argentina, what I was able to learn because Argentina, as I was saying, like at the geographical position, right? We're at the end of the world. And so we're always looking to connect with the rest of the world. So we're always looking literally up, right? We're looking at other countries to connect with. Is an openness and a sense of really never discarding an opportunity or never letting go of a potential opportunity, because it might lead to something else. It might lead to something that is a stepping stone into your to your destination, or it just might be something, an opportunity for to learn something. Once in the US, I had to kind of flip around, right? I had to acculturate, to see, to myself, insert myself into a system that was already in place. So you had asked me earlier, and I didn't respond this, like my languages. So, Spanish is my native language, but my stepdad's mom lived in Brazil for 40 years, and she is one of my inspirations. I come from a long line of pioneer women who broke glass ceilings. So I need to honor them and do the same. As I said, my stepdad's mom, she was a shipping agent in Brazil. And I'm talking about the middle of last century, right? And this is an industry where it's mostly male. We're talking about people, again, that are in port cities and customs and dealing with customs and stuff like that, and things that are very kind of male dominated. And she was a lady, right? She was a big fan of the Queen of England because she was British, right? She would have her 5 o'clock tea, bakes the most delicious chocolate cake with mint icing that I have ever had. But she was she wouldn't compromise if she didn't believe that there were equal benefits for the herself and whoever she was interacting with. And she would still dress in her Chanel little suits, but she would not let go. On my biological dad, so I was raised by my stepdad, but on my paternal grandmother, she was the first woman customs agent in Argentina. Again, a very male dominated. She was like very petite. She was like 4.5 feet tall, but she would go, and she would not stop. And I remember sitting in her office when I was like, I don't know, 5 or 6 years old, and just being fascinated by how she would not be intimidated by a phone call. She would not be intimidated if, one time customs authorities walked straight, like these 4 or 5 men walked in her office and say, this is going on and stuff. And she would really stand her ground and keep her cool and say, okay, go through a process and protocol and just really not be a pushover. And then my mom, who she passed in 2009, but my mom was an extremely resilient woman. She had a very tough upbringing. But she really believed in humankind. And she really believed that there was always hope of a different alternative, a different opportunity, something. And so she always sought a better opportunity to do different things, both in her personal life and in her business life. And so after 2 failed marriages, after she got divorced from my stepdad, she set up a dating agency. Now I'm talking about way before dating apps, okay? I'm talking about the year 1985. Right? This was the real thing where you would actually meet a person in 3D, right? You would get together for coffee and meet them that way. And so she had seen a lot of, different agencies and organizations, but really they were more on the kind of escort service kind of thing. And she's like, no, I want people to connect and meet each other for real, to get married. I mean, with the end goal of getting married. If it works, that they get along fine, and if not, they won't get married. So she didn't want to advertise in more kind of less reputable, let's say, publications. She wanted to advertise in the most conservative newspaper in Argentina, in Buenos Aires. So she sent in an ad and they rejected it. And for one straight month, she wrote letters to the editor every other day. And she said, this is a serious business. This is not an escort. This is right. And finally, they said, all right, lady, you know what? We'll just place your ad because we just don't want to hear from you anymore. and and lo and behold, behind my mom's ad of really decent type of dating agency, the newspaper realized that she had opened this, new source of income. And behind came other dating agencies, right? And so then she pivoted and she's like, this is not enough. So she went into the classified section and she placed ads saying lost and found. And so she said, okay, if you want to find your better half, if you want to find love. And so she would pivot
Oh, wow.
constantly, but she never gave up.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah.
Oh, Sharelle, we can't hear.
I keep doing this. How about now?
Yeah.
Now, yes.
I said I keep doing this. This is so amazing, and your story is so inspiring and encouraging. And believe it or not, we are more than halfway through our time. It goes
Oh,
by
wow.
so fast.
Oh, my goodness.
But I'm going to kick a question to you before the break. And then when we come back, definitely please dig into it. And that question is because you talked about how you celebrated and you pioneered other women and why it's so important for you to do that. So when you come back, talk to us a little bit more about why is it so important to pioneer and empower other women. Okay? So as soon as we come back, thank you so much, Diana.
Yeah. Thank
Thank
you. It's been wonderful actually learning more about Diana and her family and how her family has actually inspired her
Yeah.
and given her a certain level of grit. And then of course you can tell she's got her own grit too. So
Exactly. And I love the fact that, when we have these conversations, Lee, they never get old in terms of peeling back the layer and learning more about not our guests, but then, I always I take something away or a nugget away that
mhm.
then helps to continue to even encourage me. Like, I love the fact that she said her definition of grit is girl, resilience is tough. Like, that
Yeah.
is real. It is tough, but at the
Hmm.
same time, that's a part of what inspires us to continue to push. So I love that. I love that.
Right. Yeah. So I'm going to ask you a question. What so far? I mean, I don't know how many of these we've done, and if you need to get back with us on the next episode, that's fine. But so far, as a woman, what have you seen has been the common denominator
Hmm.
of our guest,
Hmm.
and what have you what have you what's been your biggest takeaway that you've actually implemented in your life
Ooh,
in
that's a
your
good
business?
one, Lee. So you're peeking into my book.
Hey.
No, but we've had so many amazing and inspiring guests that have graced our stage. And I'm always thinking about, because it's just natural for me to identify patterns and trends that we've seen, and the recurring theme about the tribe, right? And
Mhm.
having people who help to champion and pioneer other women and their success is a recurring theme. The notion of having a support system, knowing that we're not alone in life, and how important that is, and then giving ourselves the space and the peace to be okay with not having it all together, right?
Okay.
So having those moments where we recognize that vulnerability and the ability to be vulnerable is a strength, and the ability to
Mhm.
say, okay, raise a hand, I'm not in this alone, I'm not doing this alone. The grit that I have is built upon a foundation of whether it be others that have come before me, or sometimes it's the tenacity that had to occur from, you know, life that has come along its way. For me personally, as another woman of grit, as I consider myself to be, my one of my learnings as I come through and I interview so many women is the notion that it's okay to operate in a space of vulnerability. And it's okay to not have all the pieces, because guess what? No one does. But the
Right.
more that we become comfortable with sharing our story and peeling back the layers, the more that we empower others to do the same. And I'll say this, and I know we'll jump back onto our guest, which is for me, I feel I do a great job of celebrating the after effect, right? Here are all the
Hmm.
learnings, here are all the things that have come out of the stories and even my own story. But my friends, you know, constantly tell me, Sherelle, you need to do a better job of sharing your story. Like when you're in the midst, and we never want to do that, right? We never
Hmm.
want to talk
Right.
about when, you know, when the water's pouring out of the wall and
Hey.
I've got my son to take to school, and when life is happening and the dog is there and I have to figure out whether to do a hotel or whether, you know, like what does this look like
Right.
that's the time to share. But for me,
Mhm.
I typically will say this is kind of what it was and here's what I've learned from it.
Okay.
But that's a great question, so thanks for asking me.
Okay. You're welcome. Hey. Yep. Well, thanks for your answer.
So let's bring back up our guest of the hour, Diana. And again, you guys, as you're just if you're just tuning in, you definitely want to go back and replay this one. It is so impactful. I mean, just the
Hmm.
nature of the depth of learning from Diana, the ability to move and flex between two different spaces, whether it be cultural as well as in the space of communication. Like, you definitely want to go back and dig deeper. Feel free to leave your comments here. Again, thank you for joining us on Women with Grit. So let's go back to Diana. Hi, Diana.
Hey,
Hey,
Diane.
hey.
Hopefully, we gave you enough time to think through the question that Sherelle posed to you before we went to break.
Yeah.
Yes. So, Cheryl, you had asked about why is it important for me to um, think about or have pioneering women, or for pioneering women to exist. And I really think it is related to part of the human condition, right? So it's not, we talk about many times about the survival of the fittest, right? But not everybody is the fittest. We might have someone who knows how to survive in a totally different way of not being the fittest. We might have an opportunity to learn from someone who has gone through a totally different experience than ours. And so by giving that person space or a seat at the table, um, we are really making sure that we live in community and we live in society and we honor the diversity, the variance, the um, different opinions and points of views that exist in the world. We have this world. We don't live, not yet, in Mars, right? Maybe living in Mars with, I don't know anything about the planets, but with a different atmosphere or different things, there might not be a need for someone who's pioneering. But in this planet, in planet Earth, everything we have seen about evolving has to do with someone coming up, having the spark of either an idea or beating the odds so that we can evolve. And for me, evolution is connected to hope. Now, I'm talking about evolution, not necessarily, things related to development of technology or artificial intelligence. That's a story for another day. I'm talking about evolution of the human condition, of understanding that we live in society and the opportunity to give everybody a chance to express themselves and to provide opportunities to get ahead, to evolve, to prosper and advance gives us hope. And what else do we need besides hope and belief to live? People sometimes tell me, Diana, you're kind of assertive and kind of bold. And my response is always this: the act of birth and the act of death are very bold actions. So the only way I know how to live is boldly, because the only way to honor birth and death is in the same way that those actions happen.
That is powerful. I love that. I really, really love that. The act of birth and the act of death are both bold. So,
Hmm.
therefore, the only way to live is boldly. Yes, Diana, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
So Diana, we've talked some serious stuff. What are some things that you like to do for fun? What makes Diana Diana?
Well, this is certainly fun. That's the
Okay.
first thing. So having conversations, I process through language. I'm a language person. And I think that's why I became an interpreter, because it allows me to speak all day long, right?
Mhm.
But
Okay.
when I need to, first of all, to relax, I do kind of large size jigsaw puzzles. And that's kind of weird. People tell me, like, doesn't that like give you a headache? And I'm like, no, it kind of takes me totally away. And I'm always looking for solutions. Again, that's kind of how I was raised. That's like life in the hyphen, is really that adjustment. And
Hmm.
adjustment has to do with figuring out a puzzle, right? And so I sit down with my favorite beverage, whether if it's a glass of wine or a coffee, depending on the time of the day. Sometimes it doesn't matter the time of the day. It's more about my mood.
So true.
And I build jigsaw puzzles. But really, that's one of the things kind of to do on my own when I need to quiet my mind.
Hmm.
But I also do like meditative coloring. But I relish in getting together with people and just having conversations, just having deep conversations. And so I love to go around in Nashville and discover really cool coffee shops, or a really good new restaurant or bar where they're not going to be rushing you, right? When you can be there maybe for an hour or for 2 hours, just having a conversation about whatever topic comes to mind. I think Nashville is such an eclectic city that I never, it's like a never ending discovery for me.
Okay, so you brought up two questions for me, actually three. One, what's your favorite coffee shop? Two, what's your favorite, overall restaurant in Nashville? And then, if you were giving someone advice to as to which, I would say, Latinx restaurant is most authentic, which one would you recommend? And
Okay.
if you're going to hurt somebody's feelings, then you don't have to answer that question.
Don't even worry about it. So I'm going to be totally transparent.
Yes.
I I can be very loyal to some places, but then something new happens. Remember my pioneering spirit, and I'm like, oh, let me try this, right? So I'm going to
Yeah.
tell you
I'm
what's my
on that.
favorite now. It might change next week.
Okay, I'm with that. It happens to me too.
Okay, good. So my favorite coffee shop, so it really depends on the mood. The Horn is a coffee shop that I love. Their Somali chai is like unbelievable, right? But
Okay.
it's a place where you go in for an intense conversation because it's a very intense setting.
Okay.
Um, Another coffee shop where it's kind of more chill and laid back, right? I like the Frothy Monkeys. I love those coffee shops. I just like the vibe. I just like how they operate and stuff on
Hmm.
their menu.
Okay.
And then the restaurant that has like a nice fusion or blend that is more hyphen friendly for me
Okay.
regarding their menu is Subculture. I'm not big on very high end restaurants. I like a little bit more laid back. But
Hmm.
Subculture has these empanadas, and empanadas is one of our staples in Argentina that are
Yeah.
the closest I have tasted to my Argentinian empanadas. Not like mine, right? But the
Okay.
closest.
Okay.
Love empanadas.
So we want real, real. We have to get yours. Otherwise,
Oh,
we
oh
Hmm.
go to
yes,
some. Okay.
oh yes,
Yes,
exactly.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I love that. One of my favorite dishes was empanadas. and pan criollo, but I know that that's more so Puerto Rican pan.
Yes, but we have a version of that also in Argentina, and we just call it we just sometimes it is called pan de miel, so it really varies. But
Mhm.
yes, those two. I love
Yes,
food. I'm a food person, so
me
anytime there's
too.
food in conversation, I'm there.
That is fan, and
Gotcha.
you know what?
Uh,
I'm right there with you. Tell us a little bit more. And I know, believe it or not, we're drawing near, but when you think about a message or the resounding messages that you would want to leave with women, especially, given that this is Women's History Month, what resonates with you?
Don't give up.
Don't give up.
Don't give up. And always, again, I go back to this kind of idea of there is always an alternative. And the only way we can really inspire hope is by really understanding that there's always an option. The only thing we cannot change, and I go back to this statement about death, right? So once we're dead, regardless of your spiritual belief in this life in our bodies, let's say, right, living in our body, is like we cannot change that because there's a higher power that's kind of in charge of that. But while we are here living in 3D and breathing, there is always an option. It might not be what we want 100% of the time, but when I have conversations with women, especially women that come that I do, provide career coaching or training, many times they are looking for something and they don't know what it is, and that drives them crazy. And I'm like, I have been there. People ask me, oh, you seem to have it all together. And I say, you know how long it took me to get here? I continue many times self-doubting myself. But I kept looking for a different coach, a different mentor, a different system. I was in therapy for 11 years growing up because I grew up in a difficult, home, not nothing like, I'm not talking about abuse or anything like that, but really complicated dysfunctionality. And I had to figure that out. And so that was one stepping stone. And then I really had to rediscover my spirituality. So that's what came after that. And now I'm really working on understanding how, as a woman that's gone through the change, let's say, what does that mean for me for this kind of second half of my life, or second piece of my life, and really what is it that I want to leave as a legacy. So really thinking that there's reminding yourself that there's always an option, there's a different option, will keep you going. So keep moving to find that other option, because there's always one that is going to be more helpful than the one you're in.
Powerful.
Very, very much. Hey, Diana, our listeners will maybe want to get in touch with you or follow you on your social. So, how can they reach out to you on your social and any other contacts that you want to share?
Yes, so I am getting a little better with having more online presence, but I'm on
Okay.
Facebook as Diana Sanchez-Vega, author, coach, and speaker. I'm on LinkedIn as Diana Sanchez-Vega, and I'm on Instagram as well. And always visit my website, sanchez-vega.net.
Living life in the hyphen.
Yes, yes, sir, exactly.
I
Exactly.
love it.
And I love it just simply because it speaks about transition and transformation, everything that you have, talked about during the time that we've sat together has been about the ability of duality and the ability to move. And as women, we operate in that space of duality oftentimes, whether it's culturally or whether it's in the space of life and family and balance and the act of doing it. So thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for gracing the stage of Women with Grit today. It's been exciting to have you on. Any final remarks that you would like to leave for our guests before I do a quick recap?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you guys again, because this is inspirational. This is pioneering what you guys are doing with this show, and the way you've presented it, right? So I'm a new big fan of yours. I mean, Sherelle, I just met you, but I've met since the moment I met Lee and his work with the table. I keep sending people over because, like, you need to meet these folks, right? So I'm a big fan of anything that is pioneer. Um, no, I think I had kind of covered quite a bit, and just again keep moving and finding ways. And if you don't know, there is always help out there. So just keep talking until someone would listen. And if you need to take a break, no problem. Take a break and then start back up.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask one question before we close out, because Sherelle's going to do a phenomenal wrap up. You mentioned, and just I guess kind of, unfortunately because we're at the end, kind of short answer. You mentioned that you spent 11 years in therapy. Um, you know, what? How did you recognize that you needed to have therapy, to go through therapy? How did you determine the best therapist for you? And well, let's just go with those two. And
Yes. So I grew up in a home that, as I said, there was dysfunctionality, but my mom suffered from depression because she had not addressed her depression of her difficult upbringing. So I was immersed in a place where depression was an everyday thing. And as I became a young adult, I found myself very disoriented and not knowing what to do. The reason why I was 11 years in therapy is because the system I chose to do therapy is called biological therapy, but is closer to psychoanalysis, which is a slower process. But that doesn't mean that, there are tons of systems of therapy. And I went, Lee, through 7 therapists until I found the one with whom I stayed for 11 years. Because I go back to what I was saying. I had a couple of sessions or maybe one session and there was just no connection. And I just kept going. And therapy is very big in Argentina. In fact, in Argentina, it's not, what is wrong with you? Why are you going to therapy? In Argentina, we say, what is wrong with you? Why don't you have a therapist?
Exactly.
Wow. Yeah. Well, that's good. Certainly not the culture in the U.S., but we're working our way to that. So thank you.
And I am excited to see that change. I'm a big, big, big supporter of mental health. And I'm excited, unfortunately because of the pandemic, but I'm excited to see that change because it's, again, another tool, another alternative that can give us that grit.
Mm-hmm. Wow. All right, Sherelle, it's time for Sherelle's wrap up. I think we're gonna start titling it Sherelle's wrap up.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Diana, for your time. It has been so amazing to have you grace the stage of Women with Grit. I mean, so much knowledge. So if this is your first time tuning in, definitely go ahead and like and subscribe. We definitely want to see you continue to come back and grab all of this meat from these amazing women. Diana Sanchez-Vega, I mean, amazing tonight. So I just want to give you guys a couple of quick points, starting with the nature of recognize that sometimes it's about living life in the hyphen, right? The ability to move from one space of life to the next and transitioning and continuing to move forward. And if something is not working, move on to something else. So give yourself the permission to let go so that you can live forward and that you can move forward, right? The constant idea of adjustment, and life is a series of adjustments as we continue to move. No one that's doing it right now has ever done it before, which means that as we continue to move through life, that we've got to adjust, we've got to shift and recognize when something is no longer working. Balancing interactions, whether it be from between two cultures, two phases of life, the aspect of recognizing that sometimes you have to be on one side of the kilter or one side of it, and then the other side as well, but being able to find your balance in the midst of it all. Talk to yourself. Reaffirm yourself. Be positive and patient and kind with yourself. And sometimes you have to be your own inspiration. Be comfortable with being a lifelong learner. So Diana talked about even within herself, it's the ability to continue to find something new, which means that we never become stagnant with where we are, with what is going on in the immediate space that we are in. Do not be intimidated by others. There are things that we can glean and lean and learn from. We're all doing life in community and recognize that we can do so. Have hope in different opportunities, in people. Be resilient and diligent, and always pivot if and when you need to. Survival of the fittest, and I love this when she gave this quote about survival of the fittest may not always be survival of the fittest, but sometimes it's about understanding the value that you might bring to a community, honoring one another, and operating in that space. Evolution is connected to hope, she said. She said the evolution of the human condition means that there is hope. And I love, love, love this quote where she talked about the act of birth and the act of death is bold. So therefore, even within yourself, recognize that sometimes the only way to live is boldly, right? Do not get up, give up. There's always an alternative or an option. Keep talking until someone listens. And whatever you do, continue to leave a legacy. Take a break if you need to, and keep going, keep moving forward. And I want to end and close on this one where she talked about her definition of grit is, girl, resilience is tough. And in everything, recognizing that toughness doesn't mean that that's a place of stop or standing still. Sometimes it's toughness is a place of continuing to push through and continuing to press, even if it means balancing out between areas and spaces of being comfortable in the vulnerability and comfortable in not having it together, and then the comfort in finding the help, as well as continuing to push forward in it. So this has been an amazing time. Thank you so much for spending time with us, Diana. This has truly been phenomenal. So we thank you for gracing the stage of Women with Grit.
Yes, thank you, Diana. And don't forget, everyone, make sure you like it, make sure you share it, make sure you call your friends. You know, these segments and opportunities really uplift and inspire and help us all grow. So,
That's right.
Diana, thank you for your time, and look forward to seeing you again very, very soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sherelle and Lee, and have a great rest of your day.
You too. Have a good night.
Good night. Bye bye.